On the first day of May 1945, a Soviet signals officer named Lieutenant Alexei Panasov descended through a narrow concrete stairwell beneath the ruined garden of the Reich Chancellery in central Berlin, and entered a complex of rooms that smelled of smoke, spent cordite, and something else he would later describe in his regimental diary as the particular stillness of a place where recent death had occurred. He had a flashlight. The electric generators had been shut down or destroyed. His boots crunched on broken glass and scattered documents. The rooms he passed through were small and low-ceilinged, reinforced with concrete walls nearly 4 meters thick, and they were in a state that was neither the chaos of battle nor the careful order of evacuation, but something between the two, as though the people who had occupied this place had simply stopped, mid-motion, and ceased to exist. The structure Panasov entered that morning was the Führerbunker, the last of more than a dozen command installations Adolf Hitler had used during the course of the war. It had been built in 2 separate phases. The first section, known as the Führerbunker, had been completed in 1936 beneath the garden of the old Reich Chancellery, a modest shelter by the standards of what would follow. The second section, the Führerbunker proper, had been completed in 1944, positioned 2.5 meters lower than the first and to the southwest of it, consisting of approximately 30 rooms distributed across 2 levels and protected by a reinforced concrete roof more than 3 meters in depth. It sat 8.5 meters below ground. The structure had been designed not merely to survive aerial bombardment, but to survive the systematic collapse of the city around it. Hitler had moved into the Führerbunker on the 16th of January 1945, as Soviet forces crossed the Vistula River and American and British forces prepared to cross the Rhine. He would not leave it alive. For the next 105 days, the bunker functioned as the operational center of what remained of the Nazi government, a 30-room concrete shell from which Hitler issued orders to armies that no longer had the fuel to execute them, accepted reports from generals who no longer controlled the territory their maps claimed, and presided over a command structure that was, by the final weeks, indistinguishable from fiction. Eva Braun arrived in mid-April, against the explicit advice of everyone around her. Joseph Goebbels brought his wife and 6 children. The circle contracted. The rooms themselves had been furnished in the early weeks of 1945, with high-quality pieces taken from the Reich Chancellery above, as the building was being stripped in anticipation of Soviet artillery. Hitler's personal suite in the lower level consisted of a study, a bedroom, an antechamber, and a small map conference room. The study contained a large portrait of Frederick the Great that Hitler had carried with him from one headquarters to the next throughout the war, as a violinist carries an instrument he considers essential to his identity. Eva Braun's bedroom and sitting room occupied adjacent space. The walls were plastered and painted. The furniture was heavy and European in the manner of the late 19th century. None of it suggested a man who believed, in those final months, that the war was recoverable. When the Soviet soldiers who entered the bunker on the 2nd of May began to document what they found, they were working in candlelight, because the generator fuel was gone and the overhead lights were dead. What their candles revealed was a tableau that the war correspondents who followed them in the next several days would struggle to describe with any precision. In Hitler's study, an SS officer recorded in his field notes a pool of dried blood on the floor beside the armrest of the sofa, a stain approximately the size of a large dinner plate. The sofa itself was upholstered and had been in the center of the room. On it and around it were scattered papers, a uniform cap belonging to an SS officer of senior rank, and various personal effects that had not been removed in the final evacuation. The blood on the sofa would become the most forensically significant artifact in the bunker. In April 1945, Hitler and Eva Braun had died in that room, she by cyanide, he by a gunshot wound to the head. Their bodies had been carried up the emergency staircase into the Chancellery garden, soaked in gasoline, and burned in a shallow trench. The burning had been incomplete. Soviet forensic teams recovered dental remains from the garden soil in early May 1945. By the 11th of that month, a dental assistant named Käthe Häusermann and a dental technician named Fritz Echtmann, both of whom had worked in Hitler's dental practice, identified the remains of both Hitler and Braun from the dental records they had helped maintain. The Soviet autopsy, made public in 1968, was used by forensic odontologists Radar Sognes and Ferdinand Strum in 1972 to further confirm the dental evidence. In 2017, the French forensic pathologist Philippe Charlier examined the teeth preserved in Soviet archives, including fragments still attached to sections of jawbone, and found them in complete agreement with X-rays taken of Hitler in 1944. In 2025, the blood sample preserved from the sofa in Hitler's study was submitted to Turi King of the University of Bath for DNA analysis. The results were compared against a biological relative and confirmed as Hitler's. It was a piece of evidence that had been sitting in a Soviet archive for 80 years, waiting for a laboratory technique that did not yet exist when it was collected. Among the other items documented in the immediate aftermath of the Soviet entry were 2 hats identified as belonging to Hitler, an undergarment bearing Eva Braun's initials, a collection of reports from Goebbels to Hitler that had not been destroyed, a looted safe with its door standing open, and a 16th-century painting that had been removed from a museum in Milan and had not been returned. The American writer James P. O'Donnell was among the first Western civilians to enter the Führerbunker. He gained access on the 4th of July, 1945, by giving the Soviet guard on duty a pack of cigarettes, a transaction he recorded in detail, and that would have been recognizable to every journalist operating in the rubble of Europe that summer. A photographer named William Vandevert entered shortly afterward and became the first Western photographer to document the interior, producing a series of images that appeared in Life magazine in July 1945. The photographs showed the concrete corridors, the ruined rooms, the scattered debris of an evacuated command post. They also showed the shallow trench in the garden where the burning had occurred. Allied soldiers who visited the complex in those weeks treated it with a combination of horror and tourist curiosity that has no quite exact parallel. Many of them took souvenirs, cutlery, crockery, table linen. One account records a section of carpet being removed by an American officer whose name was not preserved in the record. Within weeks of the Soviet entry, the bunker had been substantially stripped of everything portable that was not bolted to the concrete. This was not organized looting in any military sense. It was the ordinary human impulse to possess a fragment of something historical, amplified by the fact that the people doing the stripping were 20-year-old soldiers who understood perfectly well that they were standing in the room where one of the worst catastrophes in the history of the species had been directed and had ended. Stalin ordered the demolition of the old and new chancellery buildings above the bunker within months of the German surrender. The buildings were leveled. The underground complex, however, proved more resistant to destruction than Soviet engineers had anticipated. The concrete was too thick, the construction too solid, and successive attempts to blow up the bunkers in the late 1940s succeeded only in damaging sections of the interior, rather than collapsing the structure. For decades after the demolition of the buildings above it, the Führerbunker remained beneath the ground of what had become East Berlin, flooded, sealed, and officially non-existent. The East German government preferred that arrangement. A bunker no one could visit was a bunker that could accumulate no mythology in public. Now, here's the part that the geography of the Cold War made strange. The location of the Führerbunker, in the years between 1961 and 1989, fell within or immediately adjacent to the death strip of the Berlin Wall, the cleared and mined corridor that East Germany maintained to prevent its citizens from crossing into the West. The area had gone from being the operational center of the Nazi government to being a killing ground maintained by a different government, and tourists who came looking for the place where Hitler had died found themselves navigating watchtowers and guard dogs instead. Tourism stopped. The site became, in the most literal sense possible, inaccessible. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, construction of residential apartment buildings in the area required excavations that reopened sections of both bunkers. The construction crews found that the Führerbunker had survived, though its interior walls had been destroyed and it was filled with water. The Führerbunker, the earlier and shallower section, was in better condition, with its ventilation pipes intact, many of its interior walls still tiled, and several metal safes still standing upright and corroding in place. The construction crews, under the direction of city planners who had no interest in creating a Nazi memorial, destroyed most of what remained of the Führerbunker's interior, filled both structures with sand, gravel, and rubble, and covered the site with the parking lot that stands there today. It is a flat, unremarkable surface at the corner of In den Ministergärten and Gertrud Kolmarstrasse, approximately 3 minutes on foot from Potsdamer Platz. A single information board was installed at the site on the 8th of June, 2006, in the days before the FIFA World Cup brought large numbers of international visitors to Berlin. The board was designed to be informational rather than commemorative. It presents basic historical facts about the location and what lies beneath it. What lies beneath it, by the best current assessment of historians and municipal authorities, is not much. The sand and rubble that filled the bunker in the 1990s are still there. The reinforced concrete shell of the Führerbunker survives to the extent that nothing short of an industrial demolition project could remove it. The parking lot above it holds cars during the day and empties at night. The release of the 2004 German film Downfall, which dramatized Hitler's final weeks in the bunker, produced a notable increase in visitors to the site. People who had watched Bruno Ganz portray Hitler in the claustrophobic conference room scenes came to the parking lot expecting something visible. They found the information board and the parked cars in the quiet streets of Berlin's government district. The owners of the apartment complex above the site eventually contacted the Berlin historical organization Berliner Unterwelten, whose researchers had been studying the underground infrastructure of the city for years, to manage the stream of visitors and correct the misinformation that tour guides had begun circulating about what exactly remained beneath the surface. A museum called the Berlin Story Bunker, located approximately 5 minutes by car from the actual site, opened a full-scale replica of the interior in 2016. The director of the museum, Wieland Giebel, responding to critics who accused the institution of commercializing the site, stated that the intention was not to make a Hitler show. The conspiracy theories that attach themselves to the Führerbunker over the decades are numerous and largely disconnected from the physical evidence. The most persistent holds that a network of tunnels beneath the bunker connected to the Berlin subway system, providing an escape route through which Hitler and senior Nazi officials fled the city in the final days of April 1945. The bunker did have an emergency exit that led to the subway infrastructure. There is no documented evidence that this exit was used for any escape, and the dental and DNA evidence establishing Hitler's death in the bunker has been confirmed across multiple decades and multiple independent forensic examinations. The shallow trench in what had been the Chancellery Garden, where the burning of the bodies had taken place, was photographed by Soviet military personnel within days of the fall of Berlin, and the documentation chain from that moment to the 2025 DNA confirmation is unbroken.